Yee! Hey guys, Tiffany here and welcome to the channel. I'm the owner of Tiffany Gordon Cosplay LLC, which is a company that focuses on costume and prop fabrication as well as education. And welcome to the community. Would love to have you as part of it, so subscribe to the channel as like the video. On today's cosplay tutorial, I'm going to be going over how to make your own dress for your friend costume. Ooh. So let's begin. And here are all of the materials you will need for making your own dress. And I'll have links to all of it in the description. And the pattern that we're going to be using for the dress is available on my website, TiffanyGordonCosplay.com, link in the description. To first start off, let's talk about how I did the shirt part. Starting off with our black fabric, which I used a cotton polyester mix, and these will be the rectangular parts, B, D, and F in my pattern. Pinning in place, followed by cutting out with some scissors. And then repeated this for the white fabric, which I used a white stretch sateen, cutting the rest of the shirt parts, which will be A, C, E, the two pieces for the back, which will be H and J, and the two pieces for the front, which will be I and G. Now that those are all cut out, we're gonna work with parts A through F, aligning them to their correlating piece, pinning, and then going to our sewing machine to start sewing them together. And for this, you want all of your seams to be on one side, so make sure you are stitching them all on that. And I started off with a basic straight stitch, followed by an overcasting stitch to lock them together. And a very important thing to use throughout this entire dress is an iron, and this is going to make all of your pieces nice and smooth. And after you're done sewing all of these pieces together, I like to go back and iron each of them flat and then pin them in place. And then we're going to tack them down with a straight stitch, and this is going to make it just look so much cleaner. Next, we're going to grab the two back pieces, which are H and J, and we're going to first stitch them to themselves, and then we're going to grab their correlating front pieces, which are I and J, and pin those to the back pieces, and sew in place with a straight stitch, followed by our overcasting stitch. At this point for the shirt, there should be 3 pieces now, and we're going to now pin them all together. Then sew using a straight stitch, followed by an overcasting stitch. And the last step I did for this part was just like when I ironed all of the black and white stripes down and sewed in place, I did the same for the side panels, and it just made it look so much cleaner. And that is how I did the shirt portion. Now let's talk about the skirt. And I'm gonna let you know up front, I did not have enough materials, and at this time when I was making the dress, we were going through a blizzard and you could not drive outside. So I kinda had to make things work with what scrap fabric I had around the house. So the top part is our normal white stretch sateen, but the underside was a non-desirable, just plain satin, and it caused the dress to actually not move properly, and made a wrinkle in the back that I can't get out. So make sure you have enough fabric for doing this. Yeah. But anyway, for this skirt, you're gonna want to trace the circle skirt part onto your white fabric 2 times and cut out. And for the gold trim parts, I ended up using a gold pleather that I found on Amazon. And I ended up using 2 yards, but when I ordered 2 yards, I was expecting 2 yards of 1 cut fabric. It ended up being 1 foot by 1 yard each. So I ended up having to kind of Frankenstein my pieces together. So you can use what I use and it'll work fine, but you'll have to do this process or try to buy in person or find a wider piece of material or one that's 1 solid cut instead of 2 separate cuts. And for this, you're going to want to trace your pieces onto the pleather, and I did this on the back side, and because it is going to be Frankenstein, you will want to mark on your template where you're going to cut each piece, so that way you know which goes to what, and do a labeling system. And for connecting each of these pieces, we're gonna actually be using masking tape and super glue, and you'll want to have your pieces as flat and touching as close as possible. Grab the masking tape, and on the back side of the material, you will cover that full piece and make sure your tape is going past both edges. Then trim it, and we're gonna grab some super glue, and we're going to apply that super glue to the seam where the tape is. And then while it is still slightly wet, you're going to close them together. Be careful not to apply too much, as it may come on top and then you'll see these little glue globs. And all of the gold trims also have a black detail line. And for this, I didn't want to paint it on because paint typically comes off of this material. So I wanted to do a stitch. And on the back side of the pleather, I drew a line as a guide, and then with some black thread and a straight stitch, followed that line. Once that was done, I grabbed my top portion of the skirt and the gold trim and pinned it in place. Next, with a straight stitch, sewed the bottom portion first, going in one direction, and when that was done, I then sewed the top part and making sure to go in the same direction that I started with the other stitch. This will help so that way the fabric won't pull in opposite directions and it'll be as flat as possible. Then we're gonna grab the back skirt fabric, which again, this was the wrong material for me, so use the same material and you won't have issues. You're gonna wanna pin it so that way the gold trim is facing upward, so it is sandwiched in between. And then with a straight stitch, you're going to sew the outer portion of the circle. Do not sew the inner circle and do not sew the straight line portions. We'll do those in a sec. Then you're gonna wanna flip it inside out, so that way the gold is now facing outward, and we're gonna pin it in place. And I started by sewing the gold trim portion first, and then after that I went back and pinned the rest of the parts to sew. I did this just because the back fabric, the satin, it did not stretch the same, and so I kind of had to pull some of the fabric certain ways. If you're using the same type of fabric, you shouldn't have this issue. Once all the parts are sewed, I then went back with an overcasting stitch to lock everything together. Now for attaching the skirt to the shirt, as well as installing our zipper. And the first step is finding your front center for the skirt as well as the shirt and pinning them together. Then with a straight stitch, you're gonna sew them in place, as well as using an overcasting stitch to lock it. At this point, your skirt and your shirt should be connected in the center, and now we're going to pin the back part together, starting from the top of the shirt all the way down to the bottom of the skirt. I should also note that the shirt back part, I had earlier done an overcasting stitch on the edge so it would not fray. Make sure you do that if you have not already. And then we're gonna sew the two parts together using a straight stitch. Next, grab your zipper, and I used an invisible zipper, and you're gonna wanna pin it onto the inside of the dress. Make sure the zipper pulley part is facing towards the fabric. And then with a zipper foot on your sewing machine, as well as a straight stitch, sew your zipper in place. And the last part of the zipper is you're going to want to get your seam ripper, and you're going to remove that stitch going down the length of the zipper, and that'll get you the cleanest, closest invisible seam for your zipper. And for me, I like to save the collar section till after the zipper is done and not before, just because the length of your zipper may vary. And so at this point, I ended up with an overcasting stitch doing my edge, followed by using an iron and pinning it down flat, and finishing off with another overcasting stitch to complete the collar and this portion of the dress. Now for the sleeves. And we're gonna start off with the strappity-doos first, tracing them onto our pleather, and I did this 4 times, followed by cutting them out with some scissors. And just like on the skirt part, the trim, we wanted to do that decorative black line, we're gonna do the same thing onto 2 of our strap parts, putting a guideline on the back side of the pleather and following it up with a straight stitch and black thread. Then you're gonna grab the part that does not have the decorative stitch, and you're going to pin those 2 together with the gold pleather facing toward itself and sew together with a straight stitch. Then you're gonna wanna flip them inside out, and we're gonna re-stitch them closed with a straight stitch, as well as closing off the back part. And that'll complete our little strappity-dooey things. Now for the cuff parts, and for these, you're going to want to cut out the rectangular shape onto your white fabric 4 times, as well as doing the gold trim parts on your pleather, and pin them in place. Next, you're going to want to sew them using a straight stitch, and for doing this you want to sew in the same direction each time, so that way your fabric is not going to stretch either way. And then after that, I got the other piece of our white fabric and pinned it to the back and stitched it together with a straight stitch, and then I flipped it and sewed our gold stitch part and then closed off the rest of the rectangle. Then for the actual sleeve part, I traced it onto my white fabric and cut it out 2 times. And then it's time to connect the 3 pieces together. And you want the detail part on the dangly tongue to be facing towards your sleeve, as well as the cuff part to be facing also towards the sleeve, and pin them in the center and work your way out. Then I sewed them together with a straight stitch, and the tongue was a little long, so I ended up trimming it and then finishing off with an overcasting stitch. And I wanted the cuff part to lay flat, so I ended up pinning and sewing that down as well with a straight stitch, and then closed off our sleeve, pinning and sewing with a straight stitch first, followed by an overcasting stitch to complete the sleeve. Then for attaching the sleeves. And for this, I got the sleeve and put it inside the dress and then pinned it to the armhole and started off with a straight stitch first, followed by an overcasting stitch. And I waited till the end to do a little tack stitch for the sleeves cuff tongue part, because I wanted to actually put the dress on and see where it would lay best and kind of poof out a tiny bit. So once I got that placement, and I just did a straight stitch, and that would complete that part. And the very last thing for completing our dress is the gems. And I'll say these gems I 3D modeled and resin printed. If you would like that file, it is also available on my website, link in the description. And for this, I resin printed them and I cleaned them up and I painted them. And then for attaching them to the actual dress, I used contact cement glue, applying it to the back of the gems, as well as to where it was going to attach on the cuffs, and waited for the glue to fully dry before sticking them together. And that would complete it. And that, guys, is how I sewed all of my Farron dress. And I hope that you found this video helpful, and if so, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, as well as don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. A big thank you to all of my company sponsors here on YouTube, as well as all of my channel members. I really appreciate you, specifically those legendary members, so that way I can financially continue to do this as my full-time job and main source of income. And I'll see you for our next cosplay tutorial. Much love, guys.